Hi everyone, Mike here from Paceler. Today we're going to be talking about scanning intervals in PRTG, what they are, how they should be set up, and even how you can customize them for a more tailored monitoring approach. So, what exactly is a scanning interval? PRTG uses sensors to keep an eye on all your devices, and a scanning interval is simply the setting in the sensor that defines how often the sensor checks on your devices and services. So as an example, it's like saying to PRTG, can you check on my web server every 60 seconds to make sure it's still running smoothly? Or check my backup system once an hour to see if everything's okay. The sensor scans, then reports back with the result, and the scanning interval is just the time between each scan. Setting the right scanning interval helps you strike the perfect balance in your monitoring, but there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First, if sensors are scanning too frequently, for example, checking every few seconds, you'll get super quick alerts when something goes wrong, but PRTG might get overwhelmed with data, especially if you're watching hundreds of devices. However, on the flip side, scanning too infrequently, checking once a day, for example, might mean your system runs smoothly with minimal load, but you run the risk of not being alerted to problems until hours after they've started affecting your users. As you can probably guess, it's about finding the right balance for your setup. Most PRTG users start with the default scanning interval of 60 seconds for critical systems and 5 minutes for less important ones. This gives you timely alerts without overloading your monitoring system. It's also important to think about the sensor type, for instance. WMI sensors have a much higher impact on system resources than, say, SNMP sensors, which are relatively lightweight. If your high-impact sensors are scanning too often, this can put too much strain on the probe, potentially causing performance issues. So, why don't we take a look at a few examples in PRTG so we can see how this works in practice. So, here we are in our PRTG instance. We're in the device tree right now, and as you can see, I've got a new device that I'm going to use to demonstrate how the scanning intervals work. So let's hop into the device I've created. As you can see, there's no sensors right there right now. So let's add a sensor just so we can see how this works. Let's go for the classic. Let's add the ping sensor, nice and simple. So here's our ping sensor. We're going to go with the default settings, but except down here, we can see we've got the scanning interval option. So by default, when you create a new sensor in PRTG, it's going to inherit the scanning interval from the parent device, the parent object above it. So in this case, for this sensor, the parent object is the device that I created previously. And you can see that it's inheriting from my device there. The scanning interval on that device is set to 30 seconds right now, which I'm happy with. So let's leave that inheritance checked and let's create that sensor. So now we've got a ping sensor created in the device, and you can see that at the moment there's a question mark there. It's grayed out and the status is unknown. That's because PRTG hasn't yet performed its first scan, which means that it hasn't got any sensor data. So what happens when we created that sensor is there should have been a 30-second timer between the scanning intervals. So what should happen very, very soon, if everything goes well, is it should perform its first scan. So I'm hoping any second now. That worked like magic, didn't it? That was brilliant. Okay, so we've got our ping sensor. That's received its first scan, and that just demonstrates what a scanning interval is. It's, like I said before, it's purely the time between scans in PRTG. So that's the basic form now, but what if we want to create a sensor which doesn't use an inheritance of the object above it? So let's show an example of that so we can basically customize things a bit more. So we're going to add a second sensor. And this time maybe we want to check a service, so let's check our SNMP uptime, system uptime. So default settings again are fine, but this time instead of inheriting the scanning interval from the parent object, let's disable that. And then we've got some scanning interval options here. So PRTG gives us some base options that we can select from default. Now we can see here the default there is currently 60 seconds, but maybe we want to, this isn't such a critical service, so let's up that to 5 minutes. And we don't need to keep an eye on that quite so often. We've also got what happens here in the second option if the scanning fails. You can customize that to react differently. So it may go into a down status immediately if the scan fails, or it might go into a warning status, and you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 intervals, whatever you want. But let's leave that as the default, and let's create that. Now, what we have here now are 2 sensors on the same device, but they're both using different scanning intervals. And I'm not going to wait for 5 minutes for this one, so let's just give that a manual scan. Okay, so then we've got 2 sensors now using different scanning intervals, so we can really tailor our monitoring approach. Now, we can go deeper here. What if, say, for instance, you weren't happy with those predefined options that we saw in the scanning intervals list? So let's take a look at now how we can customize this to a deeper level, so you can really tailor your monitoring approach and add some more customized options in the scanning interval list. So we're going to go to Setup, System Administrations, Monitoring. And then we've got our scanning intervals option up here, and you can see we've got our available scanning intervals in the list here, which you would have remembered from the previous sensor. Those are the options there, but we can just add simply what we would like. So say, for instance, I mean, if you really wanted to keep an eye on a device very, very closely, you could have a 10-second scanning interval. A little bit extreme, but in some cases it might be necessary. So we could add a 10-second option there, but we could also get a bit more creative here. Say there's a service that you need to look at certain points in your day. So at very specific time codes in the day, you can have the scanning interval check at just those specific times. And we're going to do that by adding an @ symbol. Then we're going to add the time zone. We're in UTC right now, so we're going to add a UTC. You can add your own time zone there, obviously, depending on what your PRTG instance is using. Then we're going to add some timestamps. So I'd like my sensor to check at, let's say, 8 in the morning. And then I think let's have it check again at midday, because that's why I'm expecting my service to be available. So let's do a space and a comma like that. And then we're going to put in 1200 like that. And let's also go for 20 past 4 in the afternoon, because that's a really important time for when I need to check my service. And then once again at 11 o'clock at night. So we've added some more customized scanning interval timestamps there. Let's save that, and then we'll hop back into our device, and let's demonstrate now. Let's show another sensor. Let's add a third one. So this time, let's go HTTP. Let's add a HTTP server sensor, so we can check on the service. So again, we're going to leave all the settings default, except for the scanning interval. Now, if we check our scanning interval options here, we've now got the option for 10 seconds if we wanted to, but the magic down here, we can set it to our UTC setting, which is going to scan at those very specific times. So as you can probably imagine, that can be quite powerful if you need that extra control. You don't want it scanning all the time, you just want it at those specific times. So let's create that. And there's our 3 sensors now. As you remember, they're all scanning at different times now. So again, tailored monitoring approach, giving you that control. Now, one last little thing that I can show you, which is quite helpful. Say, for instance, now we've realized that actually we kind of want to change that now, and we want to have them all scanning at the same timestamp to keep it all uniform and simple. Instead of going into each sensor manually and changing that, we can actually use a multi-edit. So all we need to do is just select the box up there, select them all at once. Let's press the settings button. And then we've got, as you can hear, inherit scanning interval is off right now. So you could either set that to on, and that would go back to the 30 seconds as the parent object is set to, or you can give it a setting that you prefer. So we could say, I just want them all scanning 5 minutes on this device. So let's hit OK there. And there you have it. We've got 3 sensors now, back scanning on 5 minutes. So I hope this tutorial gave you a good overview of scanning intervals and how you can set them up to work for you. As you saw, by adding in your own custom intervals, you can really get a greater degree of control over when your sensors perform scans. If this video was helpful, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe below, and I'll see you again next time.